Welcome or welcome back to Outernational. I'm your host, Amrita Kadambi, a musician and activist, and I talk to other musicians about our role in these incredibly difficult times. In this episode, I sat down with Palestinian American composer, sound artist, producer, and electronic musician Omar Ahmad at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, where he was an artist in residence earlier this year. And I mean, it's a amazingly sprawling conversation where we talked about all kinds of things, but some of those were the complexities of being Palestinian diaspora and the complexities of that identity. We talked about what it's like to try to make art during a genocide of your own people, which is something that is hard to imagine, but also I know so many of us, it was just an insane thing to hold all these things and make art in the last few years. And we also talked about some hopeful and maybe helpful thoughts on how each of us can contribute our skills and our talents in this ongoing fight, continuous fight for Palestinian liberation and ultimately all of our collective liberation. Here's my interview with Omar Ahmad. I hate writing bios, and so I'm always excited when I read somebody's bio that I'm like, yeah, that's a beautiful way to say it. But you say your compositions are inspired by the balance between sets of distinct feelings that are paired in the world: empathy and disconnection, loss and discovery, longing and isolation. Mm-hmm. So that is, do you still resonate with that line?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I first thought about it, because I had an old project actually called Twin Primes, which was my original artist name, because the goal of the project was exploring kind of parallel things that somehow don't ever touch, right? Yeah. But are very close. And what's wild is that I used to feel like I was exploring those things more externally, speaking of outer nationality and things of that nature. And I've found the great chasms within myself to explore, which is why I changed from that artist name to my own name. Weirdly, I feel like I've gotten a good handle on myself in the last couple of years, but the outer world now needs the focus again. So I feel like my own art is kind of shifting from, looking at the outside world, looking at myself, looking at the outside world. And anytime I change my focus, something new has changed and something new has happened. So it kind of feels the most honest and authentic to my process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the inner and the outer world are inextricable. Even no matter how much we try to separate them or compartmentalize, or oh, this is self work and this is right. This is the what I'm doing in the world. They feel absolutely, to me, impossible to disconnect, I guess.
100%.
But for people who aren't familiar with your work, and I've had the pleasure of getting more familiar with your work in the last couple months, and I have lots of thoughts and feels about it. But can you just describe a little bit about your work and your musical background, your practice, influences, whatever you feel is grounding for people?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a traditionally trained musician by any means. I think I approach music more as a combination of being a child and being a scientist. I'm also a scientist kind of during the daytime. I would say, as far as genre and the universe in which my music lives, is really, a combination of kind of Palestinian polyrhythmic music blended with ambient experimental and some orchestral music. It's also distinctly from an Arab American context, having been born actually a mile from Pioneer Works. I actually used to come here all the time to Red Hook. I was born at Long Island College Hospital down on Hicks Street.
In just in Cobble Hill, Carroll
in Cobble
Gardens.
Hill, yes,
wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just kind of understanding my own life and world through music, and it's very much fumbling in the dark is kind of how the process feels. I don't really sit down with a very regimented, well understood outline of exactly how things are going to go. And I think with my kind of initial album Inheritance, it was really trying to truly like understand myself through sound, and really understand the path of my parents. My parents were the children of Palestinians who had to flee their homeland. They're from East Jerusalem, surrounded by settlements. And my mom was born in Venezuela. My dad was born in Brazil. And then they were kind of born in transit. There was no expectation or intention to be settling in South America.
Right.
So their own lives were highly chaotic, and trying to assimilate across two different continents over a 20-year span. As soon as you pick up and understand a culture, being extricated again from it, and then, landing somewhere else. So, it was written also during the pandemic. So I had a lot of time to go inward in space, and, there was a lot of reflection. My artistic process now is a bit different. I think that, I wrote a track called Tala al-Badr alayna, which means the white moon rose over us, as a part of a compilation for Palestine for a record label called PTP, Purple Tip Pedigree.
Yeah. That's a great mixtape album.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And shout outs to Gang, PTP.
The realist
amazing.
of the real. Yeah, exactly. Behind the scenes. Not in the forefront enough, in my opinion. I would love to see him more kind of not as the orchestrator, but as the focus, because he's just an amazing human being. But I think, being thrust into what's happening with the genocide in Palestine and the just turmoil of the world, there's definitely like a visceral call to action part of my music that feels more like music activism than it feels like, self-referential, self-therapy through music, which is what it kind of felt like before. So, I'm working on another project, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But
so Inheritance is from 2023.
So I started writing it in April of 2020.
And then you released it. Like, when was it released?
It was released in summer of 2023.
So before the genocide.
Correct. And what's crazy is that, there are not a whole lot of Palestinians in the world. Like, we're pretty much an ultra minority in a lot of ways for colonial reasons just general reasons. And, when I had written the album and I floated it by a couple of labels, I actually had a record label that was going to release it in January of 2023. And after showing some of the visuals associated with it and getting deeper into the themes, the label said, we have to renege on the offer to release it because we don't release political music. And it's crazy because it's a completely, this is before October 7th. And this was a completely, there's no political ideological content within it. There's no sampling that's indicative of anything that would be partisan or agenda based. It was purely just like Arabic is included and I'm a Palestinian artist. It is too much of a risk, for our listener base. So that was really disheartening to the point where I had to take a long walk with my wife in Prospect Park. And I was like, I'm just going to release it by myself. Like, nobody's going to want to pick this up. And I was really just like down on it. Ultimately found an amazing record label called AKP Recordings out in LA. They put out some amazing music by Patrick Shirishi, Dave Harrington, Keone, Kalia Vandiver, lots of really incredible artists who I have the great pleasure of kind of existing within their ecosystem. And Scott Osgood and Peter Walker of AKP were just like completely unfazed. And they were just like, why would we not release this? Like what's the big deal? And I went from being kind of like a much smaller artist to like best, ambient on Bandcamp's monthly list and like DJ Mag. And I got way more gigs and I started getting some more attention. And then October 7th happens. Yeah. And then it was just all of a sudden big, massive burning spotlight on all Palestinian artists. Not all positive either.
Yeah, of course.
So it was, it's been a real fucking trip, leading into 2 years since the release of that record. And, approaching a similar amount of time since the beginning of the genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so devastating to hear, but I think it's also important to think about the idea that just you being Palestinian, just your identity, just your name, the Arabic language, and your identity alone was political to someone enough that they didn't feel like they could put out your artistic work. And I think, one, that says a lot about this world and sort of what the positionality of Palestinians is and how people have thought about the Palestinian identity, but also how like you are inherently politicized. So in a way, like whether or not you wanted to sort of disentangle your identity from your art, from your politics, like even an exploration, I would imagine, of your lineage and your history, it's like all of that is there. So I'm kind of, this is something I've asked other musicians also, but maybe it's relevant to this particular kind of discussion. But how do you feel like your identity, and I want to let you define that, because I think we all think about our identities in different ways. Like, how has it shaped your musical path? And not just maybe as a point of creative inspiration, that's part of it, and not just as a point of tension, like in this with this record label, but maybe also a space of joy and liberation. I just think the diaspora identity is so complicated. And I was reading an interview with you where you were using the word third culture, or the term third culture, and I use a similar third space, which is Homi Bhabha, another diaspora thinker. So yeah, I even have a piece called Third Space, because it's such a complex place to exist. And then for you, like Palestine to Latin America to the United States, I mean, that's a lot of, that's a lot of transnational kind of identity forming. But yeah, how has it played a role for you in your music?
I think there's a lot to be said about having difficult experiences early that build strength for later in your life. And I think it's really hard to discern like what is a trauma that should have never happened and what are like major universe handed to you challenges that will make you stronger and be able to see the world through much clearer, more objective eyes. And I think my Palestinian identity is much more the latter kind of in my life. I will say that musically, being Palestinian has made me incredibly comfortable with darkness and with depth and asynchronicity and things not sounding perfect. Also, Arab culture is hilariously like, I was thinking about how people have called Palestinians and Palestinian sympathizers Nazis. And if I think of Arab culture in the lens of like Nazis, like Arabs are not precise. Arabs are incredibly...
It's totally incompatible.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually.
They're incredibly hairy. They, are acclimated to really hot climates. They have mostly never seen real forests, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think, just Arab culture inherently also is like very tongue-in-cheek. There is not an appreciation for victimhood built into Arab culture. It is, in fact, I would argue that like while my grandparents were Nakba survivors and my parents were transnational immigrants who really struggled, and have done their absolute best to create a life for my family here in America, at no point did I hear any sort of complaining or identification with the suffering. And I think that that's really crucial for me as a person, because I have now all this language as someone in 2025 in therapy, in music, to name every part of my trauma and every part of my struggle and my suffering. But, within my own music, I think I've been able to channel a lot of strength and a lot of comfort, towing the precipice of darkness and lightness and levity and comedy and, deep pain and deep suffering. And I really just want to be a conduit for the world. I would much rather be like a reflector and a mirror. One of like what a Palestinian can be capable of with resources and with space and with the ability to learn about myself and express my emotions, but also as a person who can help like push a lot of people who have a limited perspective on Arab culture. There are people who started seeing me as a Palestinian DJ and then started expecting me to play like wedding music and like very kitschy, culturally, one-dimensional music from pop culture, and particularly Western exoticized Orientalist versions of that. And people will listen to my music and they're often very surprised that it's not just like, going crazy on the darbuka constantly, or like hype up jubilant kind of, music for large gatherings. And my music is very like you're on a long walk at twilight by yourself, like processing everything type music at times. So I think I want there to be a perspective of depth also when it comes to Arab emotions, Arab feelings. We've been either typecast as, a deli owner or a cab driver or a mujahid, like freedom fighter, terrorist who's always angry on TV, or somebody who is, a party animal, right? Who's in Dubai, who's benefiting from colonial exploits of the Arab world. And I can't connect to any of that. None of that is representative of me or most of the people that I know, musically or otherwise.
Yeah.
So finding space to just like expand the understanding of who we are and what we're like, and presenting an example without forcing it, just being myself.
Yeah, I was so struck when I listened to Inheritance and the single, which, how, if you want to say it, that you released on the mixtape, the Tala al Badru al Yan. I can't quite say it.
Yeah, but you got it.
I'm like, how close is Sanskrit to Arabic?
Close enough.
And I was really struck by that because I think just from reading your bio, I was thinking, okay, DJ, producer, you're involved with dance music series. And, so I think in my mind, just from reading your bio, I thought, I had an idea of like what a producer, electronic musician sounds like. And then listening to your music, I was really struck by the, I don't want to say just darkness, because for me, like that is a place I like to be. It is really, it's satisfying and beautiful to be in that kind of sad. It's I don't even like the word sad.
It's like cathartic, but and real, and it's like, I don't know. There's not good pain, but there's a catharsis from the acknowledgement of what we're all feeling, but not saying. And I think darker music allows us to go to that place.
Yeah, and it's also there. It's almost like these ambiguous emotions that aren't necessarily light or dark, like memory and nostalgia and longing. Right. Like longing is both. It can be both.
It can beautiful and painful.
Exactly, and that's kind of listening to your music. Like, yeah, ambient. Definitely, it was feeling like a lot of ambient records of things that I used to like, and post rock and things, but in more in like a production space that I grew up being really into. But it really, like, for me, someone who listens to a lot of different experimental music, it had such a unique tone to it. And especially the track from the mixtape compilation, I just, as a feeling of where we are at now, it really moved me. I mean, it really struck me in a deep way where it's like, what is the sound of this time, of this place, of where we are at? And I mean, there's probably a lot to say there. I mean, but I am also kind of curious, and maybe I don't know how much you relate to the Latin American culture, or how much that was a more transitional space for your parents to move through. But I went to Brazil and Colombia and Ecuador for the first. It was my first time in Latin America last year, and I had been touring all over the world, and but a lot of shows in Europe and in North America. And when I got to Latin America, I felt so relieved because of, at least in Brazil and Colombia and in Ecuador, the just automatic solidarity with what is happening in Gaza. And I did not encounter that everywhere, and especially in Europe, it was really, really tense. And do you feel that there's any resonance in those cultures? Because it was just like ubiquitous. It was just like Viva la Palestina. Like there wasn't anywhere we went where we didn't see a Palestinian flag or people wearing keffiyeh. Like, and I wonder, because so much of this podcast is about solidarity, and maybe people don't think about Palestine and Latin America and the fact that there is big populations of Palestinians. Like I have a friend who's Chilean Palestinian. Maybe Raimundo. Yeah. So it's actually probably not so uncommon, but maybe we think of these things as like totally different, disparate places, but that's not how the world works, actually.
I think they're really similar. Yeah, I think that I mean, musically first, one of the things about inheritance is that I think it's constantly down tempo, right? So as a DJ who in the modern hyper-capitalist world of wanting your tracks to be played out in clubs because it builds clout or exposure or whatever else it is, I really was like resisting that urge and that energy because I know people just really are not trying to play down-tempo, ambient, leaning, percussive stuff in clubs. But a lot of my like favorite down-tempo electronic music, but also just like harkening back to just percussive music of growing up, is Latin American music. So I think the track Usra, which means family, but in like the broader context of family, utilizes actually some like pads and synths that actually feel like very South American flute leaning, as well as the percussion, both the like percussion tone and the actual percussion orientation in the track feels like very hearkening to the Latin American side of things, which is funny because the track includes Arab vocals from my parents' wedding tape, which is actually where that comes from. So it's also just, I think the track Sham Oasis too. Sham Oasis is actually a pun because Asham is the name for the Levant in Arabic. And it's kind of like a fake oasis now built by, the IDF in Israel and things like that. But as a part of that, it was also something that was like a dream that was taken away from us. And my parents like grew up in South America feeling constantly like their culture was stolen from them and their ability to experience the culture of their cousins or anybody who was left behind was taken from them. So also some of the drum patterns that I use in that track explore that part of the narrative too.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also, I mean, the patterns of colonization, obviously in Latin America versus even in North America or in other settler colonial places. I remember when I was studying the kind of decolonial theory from Latin America, it's like it's a century earlier that they have their national movements, but then the transition to U.S. and European imperialism and the colonization through commerce and capitalism, oil extraction, all of these things, like being in Colombia and hearing from people about El Conflicto, like the conflict. It's like Chiquita Banana and like all these,
oh my God.
Or just like all of our, like all American imperialism in Latin America. And for me, it was like, okay, yeah, like there is such an identification in Latin America with like, and why maybe so many people connect, obviously, Israel and America and the imperialism of these places. And Israel, I know, has a bunch of dealings in Latin America that I haven't even begun to explore, but I know are referenced a lot.
Definitely.
We are like, it's like, it's not the kind of solidarity that I want to cultivate. Is like, oh, we're all tied together through oppression and struggle, of course, like that's true. And maybe that is like a certain kind of bond, but I wonder if like, for me, I'm interested in like, could we reframe these solidarities in other ways? And like music is a great way for it to be like, where it doesn't have to be that, oh, we all share colonial oppression. Like, can we find another way? But of course, I think those things are important to acknowledge and to know, yeah, we do have, whether maybe theirs was a century before, but then obviously they're dealing with similar forms of extraction to all over the Middle East and in so many places. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you're such a Brooklynite, actually. Like the more I read about you, and my first apartment in New York was on Court Street in Huntington, very close to here. Yeah. So like that zone is like was the first place in Brooklyn that I got to live. And so you're very much a Brooklynite. And I guess for any diaspora person, and this is true for me as well, but I think it's different. Like, if I think of India as my homeland, like India is a state. India is a, place that I can easily go, if I really want to. I know I can go to where my father's village is. What was your relationship to like as a person in diaspora to Palestine? Did you get to go back a lot? But I guess I'm also curious, like there's that question, but do you have ties that are also with the musical and artistic communities there, or what is your relationship to Palestine, if you have one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say, a pretty rich relationship. The first time I went, I was actually in my teenage years. I think I was 14 or 15. And we went kind of like as a big family trip. It takes a lot of like strategization and a lot of like logistical forethought that most people's
Oh
travel
my
does
God.
not
Yeah.
require. So to bring your whole family and your kids and everything else and move everybody is funny. I remember when we arrived at Ben Gurion Airport, and my dad pulled me aside before this trip and he said, "Hey, if there's one thing you should not call yourself to anybody while you're there is Palestinian." Right? If anybody asks you,
Yeah.
you're American, right? So refer to yourself as American. Don't refer to yourself as Palestinian. And we're at the Ben Gurion Airport. We approached the booth for the like customs agent. We're about to kind of get through, and someone behind me on the line is like, "Hey, where are you guys coming from?" And I was like, "Oh, we're Palestinian." And because I was like a shithead teenager, like
Yeah, it's
early
like
teenager, who's
whatever
like,
dad
whatever
says,
he
let's just
said,
do
whatever he
the
said not to do,
opposite.
because like I'm tough and I'm not
Yeah.
even tough, but like no one's gonna tell me what to do because
Yeah.
that would be unfair. Like in my mind, I was like,
Yeah, I know,
that's
I
unfair.
know.
So I'm gonna show my dad, and this is a theme in my whole life. It's like I'm gonna show my parents the world is actually way safer than they think, and that's
Yeah.
always been built into me. And more times than not, I have my ass handed back to me, and I learn, and I get kind of scabbed up, but not always true, but often true. And I got segregated from the security line. My dad got segregated from the security line, and my brother, and we were interrogated, and I was interrogated alone, and detained as like a young teenager, asked a lot of very like demoralizing and humiliating questions. They also pulled up a directory of all of my relatives and said, "Are
Wow.
you visiting this person at this address? Are you visiting this person at this address?" They also asked, do you know what a bomb is? If you knew what a bomb was, would you know not to pack it into a suitcase? And just like things that, off of a however many hours long plane ride as a kid, excited to finally visit a place that seemed so out of reach,
Yeah.
was very demoralizing. But that said, we ultimately had the trip, and I felt an instant just like connection and love for the place. And none of the things that they did to try to deter us stopped me. So my sister and I came back later on in 2017, which is actually the last time I've been. And we actually went and just like did every city we wanted to in the West Bank that we could get
Wow.
to. And it was amazing. But I will say that Hebron El Khalil, which is a hotly contested area, not far from Masaf Riyadh, which is where No Other Land
Yeah.
was shot. I was threatened by an IDF soldier with a gun for walking down a Jews only street.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was very upsetting and very scary because I was with a tour group. I made the mistake of wanting to go and just like take a picture. And it was a picture of a house that had formerly been a Palestinian house that had just
Yeah.
recently been taken over by settlers in that area. And it was like, must have been like a 21-year-old IDF recruit who had such power over me just systemically, and, could speak English, refused to speak to me in English, would only
Yeah.
yell at me in Hebrew. And our tour guide had to intervene and, break up the situation. I was trying to break it up, but the guy was just screaming at me in Hebrew. I didn't know what to do. And my sister was freaking out from afar, but didn't know to like approach the situation or not. So she kind of just like kept her distance. And, yeah, those are like common occurrences in the everyday lives of people. And if that like rocked me as much as it did in that moment, to live through that every single day, we had to walk through a cage to get to El Khalil, and be held in that cage, and seeing people just trying to come back and forth for work, standing in a cage for hours, little girls peeing themselves because they need to,
My God. Yeah.
get through. It's horrific. It's meant to stoke violence and all of these things. And coming back to like your original question, I have a lot of like parasocial relationships with people in Palestine,
Yeah.
who, are amazing musicians. I've spoken with Muqata'a, at length. Basil, his brother, their record label Bilna'is is awesome. Julmood, they put out a record called Takus by Julmood, which I've played. Tumba did a remix of one of the tracks called Joué that I love, and I've played out at, Lot Radio and at elsewhere and a bunch of other places in the city. And I really want to cultivate more close relationships. I premiered Inheritance via Radio El Hara
Oh, yeah.
in Bethlehem. So, and I've done a couple of mixes for them where I included I actually have a lot of friends who are Palestinian artists in diaspora,
Yeah.
right? And, George Abraham is an amazing poet, Sarah Aziza, who just put out a really great book, which I recommend everybody take a look at. Farah Barkawi, whose mom is still trapped in Gaza and gives daily transmissions of what's happening. And just being able to share all the diaspora voices and experiences and have it premiere in Bethlehem at a time when I can't physically go to the place I need to get to was beautiful in a way I never would have thought kind of possible. And, Elias and Yusuf Anastas, who run Radio Al Hara and Wonder Cabinet and all those folks out there, are truly testaments to the fact that Palestinians are just kind of built different. Like they do not care if they want to express themselves and do whatever they can. Like, these are two architects who are building in Bethlehem, in a dilapidated city that is cut off from resources, and everybody's really struggling to survive. And these people still are finding ways to create beautiful art and music and be crafty and inventive and all of these things. So I've been able to cultivate those relationships. But the one thing that I'm hoping to do more of soon, and I need to figure out logistically, as I'm working on this, album that is effectively a chronicling of the genocide via multiple artists in different diasporas, not just Palestinian.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest challenges is, like, how do I collaborate with artists who are there and give them a voice through this project in a way that doesn't feel extractive of me as an Arab American, as a Palestinian American, but as a natural collaboration.
They are different positionalities. I
100%.
think it's like it's good to acknowledge that. But,
Yes.
But yeah, that you do have, you have a certain kind of freedom of movement and mobility and a way to disseminate your work where you could be a facilitator of that for others. I mean, I think, I've only really gotten to know more about the experimental and electronic. And I mean, there's so many different scenes. There's a lot of improvisers in Palestine through like Wonder Cabinet and listening to Radio Al Hara and Dar Jasir and
absolutely.
Sonic Liberation Front, Dirab Kalash, who I will also interview.
Course. Awesome.
Yeah, and it's just like, it is stunning. And I remember last year I watched, or maybe I guess it was in 2023, this is where like time is getting really sticky, the documentary on Ramallah Underground.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, it is, I think, as an American, hard. I mean, not that it hasn't been hard to make art just knowing that a genocide is happening, but to actually be in a place where that is so close, where you are living in a system of apartheid. And I mean, your description of it, it's like, I think maybe there is an extra shock as coming from America and then going there, because we do have such, of course, like, I know we are both very racialized people, especially after 9/11. Like, there are certain limitations here, but where we do have a relative privilege. Like, I relate to what you're saying about, like, kind of being like, your dad says this and you're like, well, no, because I remember similarly after 9/11, like, my cousin was that in our family, where he was like wearing his "Not My President" shirt everywhere, and people were like, "Go back to Afghanistan" or whatever, and he would just be like, "You go back to like like Sweden," or and just getting in these situations that are so tense and scary, and our parents just being like
it's like we've worked so hard to cultivate the most delicate safety we can, and this kid is just taking a mallet to the whole thing.
And that is like, we feel that privilege in America, but that going into an apartheid system. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates, like, famously talks about his first experience with that, and recognizing that, yes, this is apartheid. This is, and for him, the resonance of Jim Crow, and that, seeing and feeling that in the West Bank, and knowing that this is what, my recent living ancestors experienced in America. So I can imagine like what a moment of shock that is. But thinking about folks who are there making art currently, what has it been like for you in this last couple of years? And maybe this is some of the work that you were doing in the studio here at Pioneer Works. I know we talked a little bit about to make work during a genocide of your people. Like I think we all have our experiences with this. For other people, it's like, for me and for you as well, because you're American, it's like a genocide that my government is perpetrating. That's its own sort of dimension. But how has it, I guess I should say, because I don't want to assume, shifted your approach to your work, or has it been difficult to be creative? Has it done, what has the impact been for you? And it's ongoing, right? So we're at month 20, and I'm sure it's been different throughout, but yeah, what has your experience of that been?
Oh man. I think looking at like inheritance and the inheritance era versus like the present era, inheritance was almost like an out-of-body experience, like watching my past, myself, my family, and being very much in like the seat of an audience member and bringing somebody along for an experience of a life that happened before me, a life that happened during my childhood when I wasn't conscious of myself, and then, the life that carried on. And I think music now is like first person. It's like shifted from the third person to the first person in a very interesting way that I was not conscious. I think it is messier for sure. It is more. I'm glad you brought up like the not like primary color type language that I used around emotions. Like longing is a complicated emotion.
Yeah.
And the work that I'm working on now is extremely complicated, where it's like not complicated in the sense of the heady sense of the term. It is just emotionally very chaotic and disorganized. And, there are moments where I'm writing music that feels so low and so dark and so painful, and it feels good, and it's really confusing to understand that. Where I'm like writing a song about a genocide or including sounds from what's happening in Gaza, and it sounds good, not in like a, wow, I'm an artist way, not in like a, wow, this aesthetically sounds good, but my soul feels like one of my biggest fears emotionally, and this is like a personal thing, is feeling like I'm crazy. And not crazy in the sense of like, oh my God, am I a psychopath crazy, but crazy in the sense of like gaslighting to such an extreme extent that it makes you question your own things you've seen and experienced and felt and touched and whatever gone through. And I think writing this music has allowed me to feel sane because it is a reflection back to me of how I feel. It's kind of like talking to myself almost.
Yeah.
And in that space, having something outside of myself that I can regularly check back in on and work on and contribute to in my world where things make sense and where I'm processing the extreme hell, not just hell that is happening, has given me a feeling of being understood. And I would rather feel understood in pain than misunderstood in bliss. And I think that that's a very, very confusing and very Palestinian experience. People wonder why Palestinians don't want to leave their land, why they're willing to document all of this, why they're not running for the hills constantly. And I think it's because they've just been so misunderstood that dying but understood is a better death than living misunderstood. And it's such a challenge, and it's so confusing, and it's so non-Western also in its nature.
And in its collectivity also, and like that there's this community of people, there's this tie to the land that your ancestors are from. It is very, very different. We can't understand that as Americans, maybe.
Totally. And I think the way that I'm like tiptoeing at the precipice but not falling off in my process is that every track that I'm working on moving forward is a collaboration with another artist. So it allows me to kind of show up in front of people who I trust artistically, nakedly, and to just, experience what I'm experiencing, and being witnessed in that way is very important. But also, like, I'm working with artists who are Black and Armenian and of, the Jewish diaspora and a bunch of other groups of people who also, like, intrinsically as a part of their lineages understand trauma and they understand oppression in so many ways. And there's a heartening nature to the work that also allows it to be fulfilling and important, because I inherently am not an individualistic person. Like, I think I'm unique in the sense that I've experienced unique things that have made me inherently a unique person. But like, I don't feel good as a solo artist staying a solo artist.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I feel very similar. I'm a collaborator,
Yeah,
like through and through.
Right. And it's more uncomfortable and it's more logistically complicated and it's difficult and all these things. But there's like a generative newness to it and a nature to it where, you know, all the other artists who have been involved have been so willing to contribute to this because they feel something about it and they need somewhere to pour all of their emotions. And there's so few outlets right now that we just kind of have to like put them in our pockets or put them on our hard drives or put them somewhere and then put our face back on and get back on the subway.
Yeah.
And not ask every single person, hey, do you think I'm a human? You know, like I would love to ask people that. I would love to know, but that's not a normal way to go through life. So instead, I'm doing what I can and processing things as I can.
I mean, nothing is normal.
No,
I mean, none of it is normal.
Yeah, exactly. It's like so fucking crazy. And, you know, the last thing I'll say is like, I you know, I'm not a violent person. You know, I don't think the glorification of violence, you know, is ever good. Even if violence is necessary, the glorification of violence is not necessary. And I do think that, you know, part of the project that I'm struggling with is really understanding, you know, what I want an audience to listen to and what is violent against an audience and what is catharsis in listening to something that they need to understand. And I think
mean like in the sampling of the kinds of sounds and that you're using
in the sampling, but also like tonality, like the harshness as well. Like I could just scream into a microphone for an hour and then turn up overdrive on Ableton and jack up the high frequencies and then compress the fuck out of it.
Record.
Yeah, and be like, here, this is about the genocide. But like, if I'm going through the effort of putting together music that will eventually be listened to and that isn't purely for being kept in a cabinet or on a shelf, I do feel a sense of responsibility to the listener to provide something that is worth listening to at this time. And that's where, like, you know, I don't want to write an album where people are like, wow, I just listened to that album and I'm the same level of depressed, if not more so than before. Like, great.
Yeah.
You know, like that also doesn't feel like it serves a purpose as far as my being an artist in the public eye or providing something released to a more broad spectrum audience. But I still want people to understand the feelings too. So I'm just kind of caught between.
I think it's complex, like you're saying.
Right,
it's
yeah.
incredibly complex.
Right.
And like in that single that is on the mixtape, like I'm definitely hearing, I can't understand everything, but sounds and that I feel like I have images for from watching people on social media in Palestine. Perhaps grieving, perhaps, you know, having an experience of something horrific that now we've seen over and over and over again. But to hear it in your track, for me, it's taking this thing that, like, you know, all of us, or those of us who have decided to continue to witness, because not everybody has made that decision. You know, it is such a horrific and a difficult experience to listen to by yourself, to watch and witness on your phone, but hearing those similar sounds in the context of your music with the voice. Who is the vocalist on the? There are two vocalists on that track.
I'm one of the vocalists.
Beautiful voice.
Thank you. I appreciate it. A lot of people don't get to hear like the tender voice, but the
tender voice of a Palestinian
That's more
man.
the tender voice of a Palestinian. Exactly right. We are capable of a lot of sensitive and delicate emotions. But the other vocalist and the violinist for the track is Ashley Hefnawi, aka DJ Maya. She runs a party called Hezza Party, and what I love about the track also is that she's known for like DJing and like bombastic, you know, party settings, and she and I both were just kind of like. And she's Egyptian, and both of us were kind of like, man, this was probably in like November, December of 2023. So a couple months in, and we realized we had just turned the corner of like, there's no going back now. Like, this isn't just like it was before. Like, this is going to be
we're
different
in a
now.
different place.
Yeah. And I had been listening to Cat Stevens a lot, Yusuf Islam.
Yeah.
And he has his own version of Tala al-Badru alayna. And it's set in a major key, and it's beautiful. And the song is originally a song about the original Muslims in exile. And the song was sung by people in Medina, who were welcoming Muslims who had been exiled from Mecca. And the lyrics are meant to be welcoming exiles and refugees and things like that. So I'd been listening to that song, which was generally jubilant and really happy and like, bring me your huddled masses energy. And I was listening to it so much because I hadn't heard it since childhood. And my dad had this like CD player and would play that every so often because he was like, did you know Cat Stevens converted to Islam? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's like the, dad of color who says everything was invented by the mother culture.
Yeah, that's my dad. It's did you know Will Smith converted to Hinduism?
Right,
and here's a video of him talking about the Bhagavad Gita.
100%.
And I'm like, oh my God.
Exactly. So same energy, but Cat Stevens-ified instead of Will Smith. I don't know what Will Smith's connection to the genocide is, but probably not a good one.
It doesn't
bode well.
No.
But so I think having listened to it over and over again as like a self-soothing mechanism, I was approached by Gang from PTP, and he was like, hey, putting together this compilation, it includes a lot of great artists. And I couldn't for the life of me think of like an original thing to do. I was like, oh my God, what the fuck am I going to do? And I kept listening to that song, and I was like, I love this song, but it's like really happy. So then I rewrote it in a minor key, changed the tempo, changed everything except the words pretty much by the end of it. And invited Ashley, and she came by, and we like did everything in almost one take pretty much. Like there was very little editorial process, very little mixing process. We had a deadline. We had like 3-4 weeks to kind of get it out. And yeah, we did it, and her voice was included, and Ashley's a beautiful singer, beautiful human being, just like a wonderful person with whom to experience that. She herself has, worked up and through so much building of strength in her own life based on her own experiences, and was just a phenomenal collaborator on that track. So,
and her violin playing, like the improvising. I mean, I come from kind of a more of the improvising world, and I feel like for me, improvisation, when we're dealing with things that are happening in real time, like the potency of like, it's like one take, just improvising. We're doing this in this raw kind of way. I hear that on it, it's really present there. It's like, these are people working in real time with something that is happening right now. And what you're saying about like, I mean, I think we've all felt, a sense of gaslighting, but of course, like for you, this is extended not only over your lifetime, but over like multiple generations of your family.
Yes.
Like, no, Palestine is not a place, is not real. Show it to me on a map. Like this kind of like, multi-generational gaslighting. I think, squaring that dissonance for me as well. It feels like I would rather, it's like an acknowledgement that this is what's happening. This is how I'm feeling. I think you and I talked a lot about therapy in the backyard here at Pioneer Works, which it's interesting because I think I've been thinking about that too. Of like, how do we're very privileged. We're in the Western world. We have access to these things. But I also, for me, I feel like, I'm not just healing myself. I'm trying to heal like generations of family trauma. But like just sitting and acknowledging, like that's something that I've done in therapy over the last 2 years, is like, I'm not doing it as much as I should, is like, you witness something horrible. You're losing your humanity every time, not only that you witness it, but people are like, no, that's not happening. And like just taking the time to sit and be with the pain of it, like of really like having to sit with that. And it sounds in a way like this process for you was one way of acknowledgement and sitting with it. But then at the same time, you're doing something that is there was another quote in something I read where you described your music as having a dark ritualistic sense of community. And it sounds like through this project you're creating community, you're building solidarity, as you're saying, with all these different, like, whether it's someone who is Black or Jewish or Venezuela or all these different diasporas. You're cultivating solidarity not only through, again, like, oh, we're all oppressed and, in all these various ways. And that is an important point of connection, I think, to acknowledge. But you're building a community through collaboration. I wanted to know, like, you say ritualistic sense of community. Like, what does community mean for you? It could be like in New York. I know you DJ at Leilit, and you co-founded Umboma, a global dance series. And so, these are communities. So maybe in the New York sense of community, but also in those kind of like reverberating outward circles. Like, you're obviously doing these collaborations beyond like national borders and through the internet. What does community mean for you? And especially, I guess, in the sense of like, to think about again, this sense of like healing, yes, like, I think the healing work that you do individually is very, very important, but I actually don't think that's separate from healing in a community. And actually, maybe those things are really important together. But I know that's a lot of things I said in many different directions, but like,
my brain works the same way. So I think I'm,
yeah, like, you're like, what does community mean for you, and how has that process, how are you thinking about community these days?
Yeah, I think community is an interesting word because it's so dead.
Yeah.
Like, community's done. Like, in my book, like, I think community is important, and the pure definition of community will always remain and will always be important. But community has been corporatized and has been, turned into all sorts of things. So, I, for better or for worse, am not great at bringing people together for like celebration, but I do feel that my role within my community is to be truthful, and is to be direct and honest and authentic. And I think that a lot of people are supporters, and a lot of people are leaders, and a lot of people are, they fulfill various functions in communities. And I don't know that like I like any particular role, or I rotate through roles depending on what relationships I'm in, but I do love creation. And I feel like creation is the one thing that moves the communities I'm a part of forward. It started with being just like a music nerd in middle school and high school, and someone stole my PSP in middle school with my very expensive, 512 megabyte SD card with all my music on it that everybody wanted to listen to. And that was community at one point, and then community also, means a lot of things. But I think in the terms of music, I struggled with community because in nightlife and in music spaces, there are lots of like acquaintanceships. Yeah. I mean, there's like hundreds, if not thousands of people that I'm used to seeing. And it gives this like false sense of community. It's like, oh, there are people who recognize me. I'm a part of a community. And I don't think that's true. And I feel like for myself, community exists when somebody extends beyond the connection point topic or genre or activity and starts to become a part of my life beyond that. So I would argue Ashley, somebody who I met through like DJing and through the Leilit crew and whatever, I'm more interested in knowing how her newborn son is doing than when her next set is going to be. Yeah. And that to me is community. Leilit is a beautiful, incredible show series run by Safi, Nadim, and Phil at Elsewhere. It started at kind of smaller venues, but they've kind of taken over all the stages now and just like kill it. And it was the first place that I, as an Arab of like, a somewhat agnostic, somewhat leftist, perspective, was in a room full of like thousands of people of the same persuasion, of different varieties, of course, like not like a monocultural block of, echo chamber, but, seeing queer Arab artists perform and Arab drag queens and a space for music and joy for Arabs to enjoy. And the Arab palette for Arab music is inherently different from the Western palette for Arab
Yeah.
music. So the music I was hearing there was way more interesting, way better, way more diverse. Blew my mind. I mean, I could not believe that it existed in New York City. And it was so sad because every time I would be on my way there, my first thought would be about how many security personnel they have working at this place because of concerns of if it got out that there's like this big recurring Arab party, that some incident might happen, right? Which really shows how like traumatized I've been, that I'm like, oh my God, there's an Arab thing happening. Like, is it safe? Not because of the people attending, but because of like other, folks who might have, a racist ideology or violence on the mind or something like that. So going there and DJing is so fun. And it's such a blast. It's so great. I think there's one tonight. My friend Sarah's actually DJing tonight. One of her first big sets. But yeah, it's lovely. It's amazing. It also just like really charts a perspective of, what the future of the Arab diaspora could look like, as far as not being so burdened by oppression on a daily basis, and just like exploring the more complex emotions and feelings of being an Arab person. Also, again, Arab joy is not something we saw on the television.
No.
And I made this comment. A lot of people have been throwing around like joy as resistance. It absolutely can be, but only for the oppressed.
Yes, yeah.
Joy is not resistance for those who are not oppressed and who are just like a little down on the times.
Yeah, not like the DNC's like
Correct.
strategy of like, we're gonna run on joy.
Exactly.
It's like, during a genocide. It's
Right,
like,
exactly, yeah.
You think you guys have got this wrong.
Yeah, like the Butcher of Gaza puts out like a dad rock album.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, is that the
Yeah.
kind of joy that we're leaning into? I don't think so. But I think Laylit has been a beautiful place for that. And also, like, I mean, I played Laylit, years before October 7th started or happened. And the first show after October 7th, because they actually went on a hiatus. They were like, hey, we don't feel it's appropriate to throw parties, which I really respected in the first several months into this. They eventually came back in January of 2024, and they were like, look, like, this is our jobs. Like, we create a space for the people who are here. We're not trying to say, hey, this is a place to forget the world and to party and to disconnect, but like, just come here and bring whatever emotions you have and do whatever performance you want, and we'll see what happens, was kind of their energy, which I also really appreciated as an artist going through a lot. And I remember talking to a DJ named DJ Fatin, who I love so much. She's one of the residents at Laylit. And just like an incredible like educator of people, like a real community pillar. And she was going to do a set, and I was talking with her before her set, and she was like, I'm kind of having a panic attack. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to go on there and do anything right now. Like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to play? I don't know what am I doing here, at this show? And I was about to go on for my own set, and I was like, I don't know, but I'm gonna just act like I'm alone, and I'm not gonna act like anybody else is here. I'm gonna do for me what I think needs to be done, and my hope is that if I'm really connected to these people, it'll resonate with them. If not, whatever, it's fine. I throw a set, who cares? It doesn't matter. And the set that night, I was like physically shaking, like during, like I'm emotional thinking about it, but I was like physically shaking and like really nervous in front of a room full of people who just really needed to hear and see something good. And Fatin's set was incredible. I think I got, good feedback on my set that people thought it was really important, and people started coming to my shows because of that set. Wow. And to think, again, it's like I almost orientalized myself. I was like, "Oh my God, who am I? Who am I if not the dancing Arab guy on the stage?" And that's not even how my music sounds. And still, I felt so connected to it. But the fact that people received me after that and were like, "I don't know what the fuck you just played, but I just couldn't." I was like transfixed, and I was like, "Okay, I feel like I have like my people," which is really beautiful.
Well, that just like that, there is a place to exist like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think something growing up in diaspora and becoming a musician and sort of like being very much of the minority in the culture of people who become artists, and then being someone interested in experimental things that aren't really mainstream. I never thought I would see community or like a reflection of people similar to me in the world of any of this. And And in the South Asian diaspora, I see more and more and more. Although I think we do have a much worse, we do a worse job at cultivating community, to be quite honest. But it's just, I think these are the things we get to build, and it sounds like through Umboma and through Lailit, like you're participating in building this thing that didn't exist before.
Right.
And I think that, I was on a panel in December 2023 with Huda Asfour.
I love her so much.
Yeah, she's amazing. And
I'm working with her on one of the tracks for the project I'm on.
So she's somebody who just says shit like it is. Like she tells it like it. She's very
an iron blade.
Yeah. And she said, we keep talking about collective liberation and free Palestine and, but are we actually thinking about what that looks like? What does collective liberation look like? What, are we actually using our imagination to imagine what a free Palestine looks like? Can we picture it? Can you feel it? Can you smell it? Can you touch it? Can you taste it? Can you hear it? And for me, that was a real, it shook me as an artist, because it's like, she's like, that's our job. We are artists. Like, we are supposed to be able to imagine and create. And that goes for creating. Oh, there's not a space for this. There's not a place where this happens. Let's make it happen, And it is like, even, in New York, I've been here 16 years, and I wasn't here in the 9/11 years, but I'm sure like those shifts were felt all over the place of like, okay, well, this was the vision of what Arab diaspora was, or what an Arab is, or who it is. Like, well, how can that shift and change based on like the community itself, like in this sort of self-determining way, which I know we have such incredible examples of as Americans, specifically in Black culture, where it's just like, creating a reality through this work, whether it's intellectual work, like all the incredible writers, but artists, Sly and the Family Stone just passed, and I was just thinking like, oh my God,
loss of a legend,
world builders.
I
right?
know, truly.
But yeah, I mean, something that we're kind of touching on, and just one thing that you were talking about in terms of like being in a space of like community and not having to pretend like I'm doing this or doing that, was making me think of something that was in that documentary Ramallah Underground, and I think something that Leah Mona Tawel also talked about in an interview I read, of like, what is it about electronic music and being in a space together? It's even different than a performance necessarily, where it's not like, someone's performing and people are in the audience and you're facing the stage and you're just like watching, but it's participatory. Like, you're in your body and you're in a club. And in the documentary in Ramallah Underground, they're talking about this electronic music scene that exists between Ramallah and Haifa, and like what it means to know that like the beat that you're feeling, or the bass that you're feeling or dancing to, is the same thing that this other body is feeling and moving to. I don't know how, like, I was thinking of it like embodied solidarity or something. Like, there's something of like, it's not about your head. It's like your body. It's the vibrating sound. It's the physical space that you're in together. Even if it's anonymous, even if you don't know that person's kid, or there is something about spaces and being in space together that I think is also important. And at the same time, we're doing it like across, however the internet works, even though it's ubiquitous, I still don't know. It's still magic to me. Across these spaces, I just feel like the spaces are so important.
Definitely. I think, as it pertains to spaces, one of the things that blows my mind about something like Laylat originally was that people in their spare time are coming out to see something of Arab origin, and that they're in this room on this night at this time, and their intention is to experience this thing. And I had a lot of like white friends and Jewish friends and African friends and Eastern European friends who came to the shows, right? And who didn't just have to like fully get it or understand in order to be welcomed in and a part of it. So one, people's willingness to like cross borders into what feels like maybe something gatekept or, racialized in a way where it's like, oh, this is just for them, is one of the most fun parts of being in a space like that. Another thing is also, as a part of Umboma, Alicia Coleman, who's a beautiful human, wonderful friend, and she runs a party called Sweet Cakes as well. Umboma, we don't only just do DJ sets, so we also will do like long form ambient sets as well together, blending like African music, Middle Eastern, Mina Swana music, Latin American music as well. Mboma actually is a made up word that I made up where it takes from umma, which is like the greater community in Arabic, the B from like libertad or libertador, like the freedom fighter or the freedom itself. And then ngoma from Swahili, which is to dance. So it's like a congregation of freedom and dance is kind of what Mboma means when you put it all together. And our goal is really to do sets that feel not like they're meant to be in a nightclub necessarily. We actually played at a place called Light and Sound Design. I don't know if you've been. LSD.
Yeah.
Great space to just like really like sit down, go in and just experience, within your process. It's a 4-point sound system also.
Yeah, the speaker system is amazing.
Speaker system is
there,
absolutely incredible. So we're also just really interested in like the resonant connectivity between people in spaces. And we did a set as a part of like a Palestine fundraiser. And I actually closed the set, which at times was rhythmic and dancey, with like an ambient experimental piece that I've been working on for a Palestinian poet named Fadi Judda, who's an incredible poet, very severe, intense man, but really just like, oh my God, tugs at the heartstrings. And I ended with like an improvised darbuka piece over this ambient experimental composition that I had written. And having a space where I can go and dance and move and cry and laugh and go into that level of depth when we're currently living through like the most fragmented, hyper micro niche genre. This club only plays this thing at this time with these people, with these drugs, with these outfits at this age group, to be able to like have spaces that really break barriers in that way. And having parties that are willing to go the extra mile and break those barriers in the love of music and community and not in the love of like maximizing exploitation of a fan base on a certain chemical at a certain time of day, I think is also really crucial to us in that project specifically. So I wanted to just kind of throw that in as well.
Yeah. And so you were playing like live darbuka, which is like the drum,
yes.
right? Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Like I think we can decide how these things go.
All these like fake rules and like shackles and, lanes, which just don't really exist.
And that place, silly. Like, I think for me, DIY is so important. That's why, space. When I think about space, I get really nostalgic about like the early 2000s DIY.
Oh yeah, 285 Kent, Shea Stadium.
That's why I moved to New York.
Those were the first places I threw parties. I started throwing shows in 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there was always like exposed electrical cable and donation only PBR
in here.
thing.
No, I moved here in 2009. I would like open up a show paper and I would circle all the shows that I would want to go to. Right. And I came for the community. I came for like DIY. Of course, like I also felt like the brownest person in the room at all times. And there were things that were disheartening about that. But I think, as I see things shift, I'm like, wow, we really can create. And especially the people younger than us, I see them like not maybe having as many of these boundaries that we grew up with. Like we really like, okay, you were a baby when 9/11 happened. Like you have a very different relationship to your own identity, like moving through these spaces. Not that they are not racialized also, but that they maybe have less of that kind of like really almost like that trauma space of like you're saying, like, can I go to this Arab party? Is it okay?
Right.
Like, is it cool? And like you're, like now you're queer and Arab and there's are places to go. There are, and it's not that it's safe for anybody, right? Like all these things are constantly shifting and you don't know. But what an incredible thing that we can like make these. There's like two more questions that I want to ask you that are more general that I ask like everybody, but I think are obviously related to all these things.
Sure.
And they're sort of related. One is, how has music, how did music maybe play a role in shaping your political consciousness or your consciousness about the world? Like raising your consciousness about, oh, this is the world that we live in. How like, was there any music that did that for you? And then the second part of that question is, what is our role? But you can speak to it very individually if you want, or more generally in this time, like as we're sitting here, I think tomorrow is this no kings protest, like
Right.
Israel just bombed Iran, and I believe Iran just responded, like there are immigrants being detained daily. There's
Los Angeles is on
Los
fire,
Angeles is again on fire
in
and
a proverbial way.
yeah, and Mahmoud Khalil is still
Yeah.
being held in detainment, even though
Judges have ruled
another court has said that he needs to be brought home.
Right.
So yeah, maybe two related questions, like how was there a moment or a specific music that raised your consciousness? And then as a musician, as an artist, as a person living right now, what do you think we should be doing? Or what are you trying to do in such an urgent time? Because this is sort of the crux of it for me, is like, how can we share some strategies? Like, we need to start figuring this out.
Yep.
And we can't do it alone.
Nope.
And so part of these conversations is about how to do it together. And so I believe for myself, there were moments where music did much more for me than just entertain me, where it opened my consciousness and the way I look at the world, and has now influenced how I think I should move through it as a musician. But yeah, where are you at with that?
So the political question, I think you kind of alluded to the fact that, there was kind of a modern lull in very political music. I feel like there have been like certain gaps or chunks of time where I haven't really known or haven't really felt the political connection to music. But my childhood was like completely riddled with highly politicized music. I mean, I was a huge fan of the Dead Kennedys.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of even like bands like The Offspring that weren't necessarily political in the sense of like, international, but political in the sense of like, I'm a poor white person from the Midwest and my life sucks.
That's punk, yeah.
And there are systems that absolutely suck. And, talking about drug overdoses and suicides and like the plight of the American youth and Americana, I think was a big part. Like punk/Americana music was a big, activating energy there. I do think that, of course, like hip hop and R&B was like the more like classic set of examples, whether it was like a Tribe Called Quest or, Wu-Tang and just a bunch of other, even fucking, I don't even know, just like there was a hotbed between what felt like the late 80s into like the very early 2000s where people's willingness to go there was really visceral and really intense, even if it was fucking Green Day. Even the American Idiot album, which I would not say is like the pinnacle of experimental art. As a kid,
at least they're out there for Palestine. I was happy to see that.
Right, just
as
like
a '90s kid.
Right, exactly. And I think all of those things were really significant, but also just there was just exposure to music and art through like video games for the first time at an international level. Like Hideki Naganuma is this like Japanese producer. There was this game called Jet Set Radio Future, which was like this weird cel shaded Japanese video game about like being graffiti spraying leftists fighting like the fascist cops, and you fought them with graffiti rather than guns.
In the video
that's what was the whole premise. Like that's what I grew up on. So like punk music, I was also an avid skateboarder. I was constantly skating, and skating was probably the fastest way to get exposed to really amazing music as a kid, like before the internet age of like, I'm going to Google music. But also like multiculturalism in a community. Like skateboarding brought all the kids who all you needed was a skateboard, and that was it, right? You didn't need a subscription. You didn't need a recurring source of income. Generally speaking, the kid with the most expensive board got made fun of the most because they sucked, because they went and bought the fanciest thing and thought it would give them skills. It's like, so I was
show up somewhere.
Totally show up somewhere. There's a spot And it was never in like a nice neighborhood or like an affluent neighborhood, because there'd be security or people like chasing you off the property. So you're always in some like industrial, like dilapidated area where a bunch of kids got together and talked about music and their lives, and everybody's life was fucked up, and we started understanding why. And then it all became, a big like tapestry of our lives. And I think from there on out, I got really into experimental music, and then I got really into like ambient music, and then piecing all of it together just kind of found my way, and I think that was impactful, especially as like a post 9/11 Arab kid in the city as a skateboarder, not from anywhere near the middle of the city. I was down in Bay Ridge, which at the time, and it still very much is, like very blue collar, multicultural, kind of feels a little dated, in certain ways.
I love
which I love.
I went to Alpine Cinema
Oh
to
my
see
God.
Sinners, and I
How
was
was that?
like, oh, it was great. But I was like, I went to Al Aqsa Bakery, and then I like went.
Oh, yeah.
It's that theater is like frozen in the 90s.
Oh yeah, you'll lose a shoe just walking in there, But yeah, I mean, that was my growing up movie theater.
Yeah.
And it sucked then and it sucks now, but it's also a cultural experience that's completely necessary, like a bowling alley, of cinema. But so I think all of those things and those experiences kind of formed me. I also, like, as a kid who just felt categorically misunderstood at school and by folks in the public eye who didn't understand Arabs, I turned to music. Music was a safe place for me to just like put my earbuds in and take the train as far as I could and just listen to really intense things. Also just like artists like System of a Down, who were like invoking words like genocide, in their music, in literal terms, like not even saying like, and this is a criticism I have for a lot of ambient music, a lot of experimental music, is I don't think it names things often enough.
It's like, oh, we'll just be in this abstract.
Yeah, it's like the La Croix of political music, where it's like it has an essence of something that if you really look for it, you can find it. I think we're in an age of like viscerality, where things need to be real and at skin level and at the surface and really felt. So I think I miss music from that era. I actually found myself listening to a lot of music from my childhood more recently, because it's people wailing into a microphone.
Yeah.
And they're willing to do that,
I'm still trying to do that.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, it's like I like got tired of like, I want to say it as directly as humanly possible, where there's no ambiguity. The audience doesn't get to interpret this. Like, this is what it is. This is where we're at,
100%. And it can still be art, and it can still be beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, obfuscation and art are not synonymous. Like they don't have to be like that. And your other question, could you remind me? The other part of the question?
What do you feel
what do we do now?
What do we do now? I mean, and you could talk about this from how are you thinking about your own role, but maybe you have thoughts about what any of us should be doing. I mean, it's a surreal time of holding insane amounts of cognitive dissonance together, and I think as an artist sometimes I really oscillate between feeling like, art is so powerful and this is what we should be doing and we need to mobilize in this way and this is like the impact we can have, to like, actually none of this matters at all. Like, the world is ending. Like, why are we even, at this show? Why are we even making this record? Like, where are you? What are you feeling at this moment? And we're talking about this moment, this snapshot in time. Obviously, this probably is a different feeling every day, but let's say right now, where are you at?
So right now, there's two ways I feel, one of which feels honest, so I'm going to say that one, which is like the big fight hasn't happened yet. And that scares me, because I want to believe that this is the worst of it. But like you said, kind of in the same spirit as Huda, like if we really sat down and imagined everything that we wanted to be different, it means everything needs to change. It doesn't just mean like our attitudes about specific subjects need to change. We're at a period where, AI is going to start making music and streaming services are killing art. And
Timbaland just released his
God,
AI artist. I was so, oh God.
Bruh, I loved Timbaland.
I know,
as a
me
kid.
too.
I fucked with his production
my
so
God.
much. So good. Yeah, that was That really was like, dude, this was not the news that I needed right now. Like, for you to blast onto the scene and be like, "Wah," if you were like, yeah, I'm Timbaland and fuck Eurovision, I would have been like, yeah, welcome back to the collective consciousness. But yeah, no, not great. But one, I think that people need to start understanding what skills they have. And if you're doing something that you hate, you need to start doing something that you love. And if you're doing something you're not very good at and there are better things you can do to serve people, you really need to start doing that as soon as you can. And I was on a panel at Nowadays. There was like a small like collective thing. Elise, who works at Nowadays, who's an amazing DJ as well, hosted a group about like, hey, what the fuck do we do?
Yeah.
And she was like, you seem like you would know. And I was like, I don't know. I'm not qualified for that. But, the first thing is really just like understand yourself. Like if people really understand the skills they have and what they can do to better the world, they don't need to know like what job they need. They don't need to know, they don't need to like leave their job and go live in some, kibbutz in Bushwick equivalent, and prove their solidarity by not having a job, the kibush. But yeah, I mean, I think people need to first like cultivate within themselves, like, hey, what are the top 3 things I can do to make the world better?
Yeah.
2, spend more time in physical space and less time on devices. Like I very much believe in throwing a party where you invite everybody and you start a conversation and say, hey, what can we all do together as 5 people, 7 people, 10 people, 15 people to start making the world better? I don't know anybody who's ever done that, which is crazy because everybody's like, hey, how do we make things better? Like, what do we do? But nobody's actually brought people together and been like, hey, all right, let's do something now, right now. Like, what do we do right now? What can we do right now?
Yeah.
And I do think that, I can't change the Israeli military. I can't change the U.S. military, but I work in emergency medicine. I design products to stop bleeding for people. And my hope is that one day it gets to Palestine and gets to the West Bank and Gaza and helps save lives, right? That's what I do in my daytime, right? That I think allows me the ability to explore musically and express myself in ways where it's not directly tied to a collective action, and my music is becoming more collective activism oriented just by nature. The next is to, protests are helpful, but it is more powerful to bring people together in like unique actions. Protests were great when the remit was prove to the world that we exist. We've proven we exist now and that we can get together in protest. But like mutual aid groups, I think are absolutely crucial. there's a group called Food Fight. They provide meals to the homeless and they're an extraordinary group. But I was like, hey, if you happen to do like mutual aid via like a courier service, which I did a little bit during the pandemic for people who like elderly folks who couldn't go outside because they were immunocompromised, coordinate a courier service with Food Fight. Like they're probably overburdened, but find ways to create connectivity so you don't just have standalone organizations that really just try to do one thing. We need like organizational ecosystems at this point that can help each other and that can do things. I also very much believe in like Skillshare type stuff too, moving away from like a lot of heavily like currency based stuff.
This is where we've got to go because I think what we're seeing and living through is the fall of an empire, but we are in the belly of the beast.
Oh, absolutely.
And
life in the core.
Yeah, we're in the imperial core, as they call it, and we're citizens of the empire, and we can see that the ruling class here is not going to, gracefully and softly manage the decline. It's the opposite. It's like literally the empire is crumbling from within, and the ruling class is pretending that that's not happening and doing everything in their power to kind of save themselves and just like be like, no, we are Rome, while it's burning.
Exactly.
And so the mutual aid and the community care, like same in the pandemic, like this pandemic was so, I always try to think about the lessons of the pandemic because I think it's like, are we going to depend on the ruling class to think about our safety? No, they think about productivity in capitalism.
Right.
like that's all we are to them. So we're going to have to feed each other or get each other PPE. And I do think that it's such a good point you're making, is like more and more and more of that is going to need to be happening. We're the only people who are going to take care of each other as this is going down. And yeah, protest, I mean, that's a whole other, we could have a whole podcast on like just these strategies alone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like tomorrow I'm thinking, oh, do I go to the protest or do I canvas for Zoran or do I
I know, right?
like which thing? And I think just doing a thing is really important, but I think you're right. Like there's a June Jordan poem, I believe, and we love June Jordan.
We do.
Where she talks about this exactly, of like first, getting 2 people together, getting 4 people together, getting 10 people together, it's something around a tree. I'm not even going to try to quote it because I can't remember it well. It. Yeah. And it just, that's the image I have. But yeah, that feels hopeful to me. So I guess let's end on the hopeful note.
That sounds good. Yeah. I think to add to that, I'm someone who, by nature, I love bringing people into things. Like I wouldn't say that I'm like the archetypal extrovert by any means, but people have so much potential. It's so extraordinary. Like I would really like to believe that the problems that we're facing are more ideological, and just because of the heft of the scale of society and how slow it has to move, and it's not as dynamic anymore. Communities used to be more dynamic and able to change more quickly and adapt to that change. And I just, we've been able to overcome technical feats and challenges and survival. Like our hearts have never stopped beating.
Yeah.
Like our heart, like in your body and in my body, has never stopped. And the fact that that can persist, we can overcome like fucking universal basic income. We could figure it out.
I think so.
we could figure out housing, right? There's enough land and empty homes and resources to make it work. The incentives of society just have to shift.
The incentive and the consciousness of people, because I think it's true. Like people have so much potential, but you are systematically every day made to feel powerless, and by design.
The dominance culture.
By design.
Yeah.
And so I think people, they can't even begin to recognize that potential or that we do have agency or power, because we are specifically disempowered all the time. But I do feel like, as scary as it is to see what's happening in LA, being a Californian and being like, yeah, you like think about 1992 and it feels like, oh, is this that? It isn't. It's something, we're in a different moment, but it's both scary and hopeful to see people facing off like that and saying, no, I'm not going to stand around when my community members are being taken. And I feel like, yeah, more of that, more of that. But it's, we have a long road ahead, and I think just doing something and recognizing your skills. Like, I think that's amazing that you're a scientist as well, because I have no other discernible skills other than talking and making music, and teaching.
Well, talking and making music have led revolutions, so I would not discount those skills.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're very good at them.
And that's the whole point of this podcast, is like recognizing that it's like music has never been a minor role in revolution. It has always been at the center of it. And we should not think of ourselves as powerless or without agency or without potential for kind of some big stuff. So
absolutely.
So yeah. Well, thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Well, that was my conversation with the incredibly thoughtful Omar Ahmad. Honestly, I could have talked to him for another 4 hours, which we actually did recently at Jaffa Cafe in Brooklyn. And it was delightful. If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to hear more like it, please subscribe and follow on Substack at Amrita Kadambi under Outernational. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. And this helps because it's still a baby podcast and I could really use your support. Outernational is produced by Z Park. We record at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, and it's engineered by me. As always, I'll play you out with a track by the artist you just heard. This is Usra from Omar's album Inheritance. Until next time, solidarity.
على كمال هالخير انا اللي بحكي عيد حمدان. اهلا وسهلا.